Hey, on today's podcast, we interview UFC champion Miesha Tate, and I got to tell you, we went super deep. Miesha opened up about some things that she has not previously talked about in public. We talk about some capital T trauma and some lowercase t trauma that's happened in her life, and how even winning the UFC championship and being at the pinnacle of a sporting promotion like the UFC was not enough to fill the void that she was filling. We also go into her fight preparation, what a fight camp looks like, and talk about her new podcast, Built for Growth, and the lessons that she's trying to bring to other individuals and other fighters to hopefully get through her challenges faster than she was able to. And I got to tell you, of all the podcasts that we've done, this was one of my favorite, and I was not expecting it to go as deep and personal as it did. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, it's Scott Groves with the On the Edge podcast. I'm here with somebody who I've actually been a fan of for 10 years, Miesha Tate. And then through this very interesting convergence of events, my wife and I met her and her husband, and has just been like, it's just been awesome getting to know you. And so for those of you that don't know Miesha was a high school wrestling champ. Then she went into the world of MMA and mixed martial arts. She was a FCF Bantamweight champion, then a Strikeforce women's Bantamweight champion, then a UFC women's Bantamweight championship. She was the head coach of season 18 of The Ultimate Fighter. And something I didn't know about you is that when you took a little bit of a reprieve from the UFC, you were the vice president of One Championship Fighting, which I want to talk about that. You're a mom of two amazing kids who I've gotten to know, and just recently launched your podcast, the Built for Growth podcast with Miesha Tate. What did I miss in my 60-second Reader's Digest introduction of your crazy life?
Well, you know, some people who know me but don't know me from fighting know me from winning Celebrity Big Brother 3.
What? You were on a reality show?
I was. I think I was on the most challenging reality show that there is, because we're completely locked away from the outside world. No other reality show really, to my knowledge, for that amount of time is like completely isolated from the outside world.
Did you have kids at the time?
Yeah, they were smaller. It was tough.
Oh, that is tough.
Really tough. I think it was like 7 weeks I was gone.
Oh my God. So in Big Brother, is that the one where they lock you in a house and they record like every single minute?
Every minute.
And then do people vote you off?
Yeah, inside the house, if you get put up on the whatever, I can't remember what it's called now, the block or whatever, I think is what it is, then you can get voted off.
So you and I were talking at a barbecue that we were at, and you're like, yeah, the wild thing about my career is I was an MMA fighter before I had a chance to become an MMA fan, because back in the day, there was no women actually fighting. Can you tell us like a timeline, like what years you were in high school wrestling with the boys and getting your ass kicked and ass kicked? I listened about that on your first couple of podcasts. And then when you like went through this evolution of getting into MMA?
So yes, it's a great question. So I was 15 when I went into high school. So I know most of kids are 14, but anyways, I was 15 and I decided I wanted to play sports in all seasons of the sports season, but in the winter, it's like only women's basketball. And I just think that is the one sport I just was not built to play. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not tall. I'm white. I don't jump high. I'm just not a ball sport person. So my friend Sharon was like, why don't we go out for wrestling? And I was like, well, maybe. I was like, but they don't have girls wrestling. She's like, well, yeah, but you know, if they don't have it, turns out we can go on the guys team. And I was like, I don't know if it was a good idea, but I was like, I'll go ask my mom. So I went home. She's like, sure, you can do it. Just don't tell your dad.
What year was this, by the way?
2000. Okay, wait. I graduated in 2005 from high school. So back that 4 years.
2001? Yeah. Because I graduated in 97 and we had two girls on our wrestling team, and that was like a super outlier. And the only reason they were on the wrestling team is because they both wanted to go to West Point. And so they wanted this like manly sport that they had done so that they could bolster their resume for West Point. But there was not, I mean, women's wrestling in high school or girls wrestling in high school is the fastest growing sport in California right now. But back then you were probably the only girl, right?
Yeah, well, my friend Sharon and we did. And there were a few stragglers throughout the state of Washington, but it was not a common thing by any means.
Oh, man.
But by my junior year, they started implementing a women's state wrestling in between the boys' rounds. So we at the Tacoma Dome is where the state tournament took place. They would do round robin style tournament on the break of the boys, and they'd have the women do a round robin.
So were you still wrestling with the boys and the girls?
Yeah, I was wrestling primarily guys because there really wasn't very many women. Every once in a while, we'd get a tournament that have multiple schools from the state, and I'd get a chance to wrestle a female. But mostly, I would say 90% of the time I was wrestling guys. But at the state tournament, they kind of collectively took all the females, did a round robin tournament. But I broke my ankle my junior year wrestling 2 weeks before state, and so I didn't get to do that. But then my senior year I did, and I won, so I was pretty pumped.
State champion. And then you decided, I'm a good wrestler. I should probably get punched in the face for a living, or punch people in the face preferably.
I was exactly the opposite, to be honest. I had no inclination to fight anybody, and so when this opportunity presented itself, even to train striking, I was like, absolutely not. No way. I was like, I have zero interest in punching anybody, and I certainly don't want to get hit in the face. Does not sound fun at all.
So did this happen in college, or did you meander into an MMA gym, or how did this come about?
So it happened in college. My dorm mate, Rosalia, who did karate, she comes out in her karate suit one day, and she's like, Miesha, there's this mixed martial arts club sport. You got to come check it out. And I'm
Club sport.
Okay. And so it was by the students, created by the students, not like officially recognized by the college. And I looked at her and I was like, you're not getting me in one of those outfits. I don't do that. Like, whatever it is you do, I don't do that. And so she went without me that day. And the next day she came back and she's like, Miesha, most of these guys are like former high school wrestlers. So they had just cut the wrestling program at Central Washington University, I think the prior year to me coming. So some of these guys had not transferred to other schools. They didn't have a wrestling program now. So they were kind of looking for something that resembled wrestling, I guess. And so a lot of the guys there did happen to be wrestlers. So when she said that, I was like, all right, I'll come and try it. And I went, and on my very first day, I learned how to choke people. And it was awesome. I was like, I'm hooked. Like, I learned rear naked choke, triangle choke. I don't even remember, guillotine. And I was like, now this is up my alley, right? This is kind of an add-on to wrestling. I could wrap my head around that. But on like the striking part of the class, I would never join the striking part. They would kind of split it in two groups, like grappling, striking. And I was like, no, I just want to learn grappling. And then I got invited by these guys to my first amateur fight event, which to my recollection was the first time I had ever watched mixed martial arts. So my dad will argue that I had seen it before and that, because he has it all. He was a fan of the UFC at that point. I didn't even probably know the UFC really existed. It wasn't something that I was interested in. So if he had it on at the house or we went to barbecues and it was on, it just didn't grab my attention.
Right.
I had no desire to fight people, nor did I have a desire to like watch it. It wasn't on my radar.
So it was just like some dude was like, hey, Miesha, first date, let's go watch people get bloodied up and punched in the face.
Yeah,
and you're
basically.
Like, okay, yeah, all right.
And so I went and I loved it. I was just all for it. Just a crazy reaction that I had to watching the fights. I felt like I needed to be in there, kind of. And I was like, man, if they can do it, I think I could do it. And then I'm sitting there and the crowd's kind of leaving. And all of a sudden I hear the microphone announce, hey, in 3 weeks, there's an all-female fight card. If anyone's interested in joining, please make your way down. So I just went down and signed up. Like literally no other thought than that.
The only story I've heard this crazy is I've got a friend who's like, he's like a biker guy. He likes to just fight in bars. And he was in Mexico, blasted drunk at an amateur fight. He was like maybe a blue belt in jiu-jitsu and had a lot of bar fights. And they just come on the mic and they're like, is there anybody here who weighs around 212 pounds who's willing to fight in 30 minutes? Because we just had a guy back out of a fight and he's blasted drunk. And he goes, I'll do it. Oh, and he got in there and won. And then he had like 3 more MMA fights and got just obliterated. Apparently he only fights well drunk. But I've never heard anybody just like go to a fight and then be like, yeah, this is totally what I want to do. There's usually some evolution. They did the mini mall karate stuff and then they saw the UFC. But you were not a fan per se when you signed up for your first fight.
No, not at all. And 3 weeks later I was fighting and that was it. Then I started watching the UFC after I kind of started training. And of course it became part of the cultural fabric of my everyday life. It was around fighters and amateurs, pros, wrestlers. And then I started watching the UFC.
And how did those first couple of fights go? Like you'd never been in a fight before or been bloodied up or anything like that?
No. So my first fight ever was against a gal named Liz Posner. And to this day, I've actually tried to look her up. I recently started saying this on podcasts. I'm like, maybe someone will be able to connect us. But it was in Wenatchee, Washington, and it was on a reservation. And mind you, I did not know how to strike at all. Obviously, you don't learn how to do that in 3 weeks, you know? So I started to learn that punching with your left hand was called a jab and punching with your right hand was called a right cross.
You went into your first MMA fight, like not knowing what a jab was?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had learned in 3 weeks that it was called a jab, but to say that I did it well was, you know, a very big stretch of the imagination. So no, I really was so rudimentary in striking. The only thing that I knew how to do was wrestle. I was also still very, very green in even the jiu-jitsu aspect of it. I knew probably 5 basic things. I knew like what a rear naked choke was. I knew what a triangle was. I knew what an armbar was. And I knew like a hitchhiker. I don't know if I knew.
To get out of an armbar, maybe?
Right, to get out of an armbar. Yeah, yeah. And I think I did use it once. I think she tried to throw up an armbar, and I had a hitchhiker out of it, if I remember right. But that was it. But in the first round, I took her down, and I just remember being so surprised because I'm used to wrestling these monster men who are just impossible to take down. And she was so tall. She was a Muay Thai fighter. So her and her husband owned a Muay Thai gym up in BC, I think, in Canada. And I took her down so easy, and I was like, holy shit, that was like really easy. And I think I was just like admiring my own work, if I will. And then I don't even know if I threw punches on the ground in the first round because I kind of just wrestled her like a lay and pray round. I really didn't know what the hell I was doing. And in the second round, they had come with a better game plan. So as I'm trying, I have like 1, 2, 1, 2, try to rush her. She catches me in a Muay Thai clinch. I didn't know what that was, nor did I have any idea how to defend it. So pretty soon knees are flying up at my face. And at this time, amateurs are not protected in any way. You know, There's no puffy gloves. There's no headgear. There's no extra, knee pads, shin guards. These are things that you'll see now usually in most. You can
still soccer kick people in the head back then and all types of crazy stuff.
There was nothing.
Because like, if I remember correctly, if we go back to 2001, 2002, this is still when most amateur fights are like in the back of a bar or a couple hundred people at a carnival, seen as like a spectator, like almost like a cockfight. Like it's just like, it's not in the mainstream, right? Hey there, Scott Groves with a quick interruption to the podcast. Sorry about that, but I just want to take a quick minute to announce our sponsors here for the podcast, and that sponsor is me, Scott Groves. It's actually the revenue that we generate through doing mortgages here at Neo Home Loans and the money that we generate from the coaching program that I run, Consolidated Coaching for Loan Officers, coaching by loan officers for loan officers that helps support this podcast. I really started this in 2021 as a passion project during COVID, and we're excited to bring you a new episode every week, but this only happens if I'm making money in my real full-time job. So please, if you or somebody you know is looking to buy, sell, or refinance a house, our team is licensed in almost every state in the country. And if you know a loan officer who's looking for sales coaching, personal development coaching, lead generation coaching, please, please, please get in touch with us. Scott at the Scott Groves team. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love for you to support our other endeavors, which is mortgage financing and loan officer coaching, which allows this podcast to exist. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming.
One of my first coaches, Dennis Hallman, has some crazy stories. Like he literally fought in a dog kennel. I kid you not. Where people like turned on like their car lights because the sun started to go down. So they all lit it with car lights. And he fought in like one of those big giant size dog kennels, but it's just like a little cage, rectangular shaped. I'm like, really? Like that, but that was luckily just a little before me.
Right.
So not saying that it was all smooth riding, from 2000. I think my first fight was at the very end of 2005. But it was starting to become a little bit more of an organized sport. So my coach, Robert Follis, who passed away, he was the inspiration for my podcast, Built for Growth. But he told me, like, he trained up at Team Quest. So with like Matt Linlin and I think Horodesky was there, like some of these other guys, maybe Randy Couture here and there. But anyways, they would train and sometimes they would go and just spar each other like in a garage on concrete. Just like, I mean, it just blows my mind, right? Just can you imagine being just not even fighting, but like just being taken down on hard floors, like your elbows, your knees, your head. And I mean, they're not drilling.
Right. They're fighting.
They're fighting. So luckily that wasn't my experience. I never had anything crazy like that. But the sport was still a lot of the blind following the blind, you know?
So you get caught in this Muay Thai clinch and you're taking knees to the face. Is that the end of the fight? Like, did you lose that one or?
No, fortunately, well, I won't spoil it. Let me tell you. So I get my nose broken, just absolutely smashed with a couple knees. And
Still looks fine.
Yeah, you know, surprisingly, it's okay. It's I think I've just gotten lucky that it's healed mostly straight. Really lucky. But because I didn't go to the hospital after this fight, mind you, but my nose is just absolutely obliterated at this point. And I'm still trying to take her down. So I'm kind of driving so hard into her that I'm sliding down to her ankles. And which at that point, I think I'm relieved because at least I'm out of the way of her knees. But she spins around. She gets on my back. She gets her hooks in. She's trying to choke me. And I'm just watching this pool of blood in front of me grow. It's like there's not even, my nose is not even dripping at that point. It is a steady stream of blood. I am bleeding like a faucet. And I remember I'm kind of trying to defend this choke. And I think I'm just really taking it all in. Like, what in the hell am I doing? What just happened? Like, mind you, I've never been in a fight in my life. I've only been in wrestling matches, so I have never been hit in the face like this. And I kind of had to gather myself in that moment. And I remember she was having trouble getting the choke, so she sits up and she starts hitting me. And one of them hits me in my ear. And I don't know if you've ever been punched in the ear, like Brooklyn, like it stings. And I lost my temper. I just think it's the only time in a fight I've ever lost my cool. I've always been very calm in fights, and that one I got pissed. And I started bucking her down into a guard position. So she was on my back, so imagine she just kind of reverses that, and now she's underneath me, and I'm in her guard. And I'm just mad, and I want revenge. I want blood. And I'm standing on my tiptoes, and I'm raining down these punches, and, you know, she's just kind of like her eyes are squinting, and she's like holding her hands up, and I'm just trying to, you know, knock the living daylights out of her, give a little back, you know. And then we go back to our corners. I think the rounds were pretty short, 2 or 3 minutes or something like that. And my corners were just like jaw to the floor. Like they didn't know what to think about a female getting hit that way and trying to like stop the bleeding. And so I don't know why exactly, but they threw in the towel. And so I didn't get to go out in the third round, which I remember looking over at her when she saw the towel go in, and the look of relief on her face made me more mad than ever. I was so pissed because I'm like, I knew and she knew what I was coming here for. You know, in the third round, like she'd given me really her best, and I'd still turned the tides. And now I feel like a fighter had been born in that moment. So the third round was like, it was going to be mine. And I think I could have won the fight, but it didn't work out. So I started my career with a loss, and I had to just kind of revamp from there.
So I feel like guy or girl, that could have gone one of two directions when you're sitting there looking at this pool of blood on the ground. You could have said, what the fuck am I doing? I'm never doing this again. This is the dumbest decision I've ever made. Why do you think your mind went, oh, this solidifies me as a fighter? Like, this is what I want to do versus, yeah, I tried. It wasn't fun. Because I have a friend whose name I won't mention, state champion wrestler, one of the toughest human beings I've ever met. And he had that same, almost word for word, that same experience. And he got out of the ring and he's like, what am I doing? Like, I'm a pretty smart guy. Like, why do I want to get punched in the face for a living? He just didn't have it in him to be a fighter. And then he went on to be a very successful school teacher and start businesses and whatnot. But what was it about you that in that moment you were like, yeah, I'm really made for this?
He sounds a lot smarter than me, if I'm being honest. I don't know, man. I just was so used to never giving up. I think being a female and at some points of my 4 years in high school, being the only female on the team, and just that was what I contributed to the team, was never giving up. I didn't win matches usually against guys, but I could not get pinned. Like, right? If you lose a match by getting pinned, it's 6 points. If you lose a match by points, it's 5 points against the team. So I would always try to just be like, hey, I'm just like, that is my MO. Just, you don't give up. And I think I just kind of had started to make my identity in that. So it didn't really matter how difficult it was, because even though that fight really broke my nose, I mean, I had been through the gauntlet in wrestling already. You know, I had plenty of bloody noses, cross faces, cut lips, mat burns, you know, injuries, you name it, broken ankle. So it's not like it was the first time getting injured. Right. It was the first time getting, handled in that way of striking. I just didn't know. But I also knew that I didn't prepare right. I mean, anything you want to do well in life, you don't just like, oh, I'm going to just jump into it, right? I mean, You can. That's what I did. But then I learned a hard lesson, and I was like, I got to prepare better. That's what it was. I knew it wasn't anything that I, wasn't capable of, just lack of preparation. So I don't know. In that moment, when you're on your hands and knees and there's blood coming out of my face, and I don't know exactly why I chose to not just tap out or give up in that moment, or why I kept fighting. But I just think it had to come from, deep within me and my soul, my spirit. Say some people fight or flight, like some people's just instant reaction is to run from things. Yeah. Mine is not that. My instant reaction is to run to things and through them. So, I mean, that carries on in everything that I do in my life. And sometimes I have to face palm myself and be like, why did you do that was so dangerous? But it's just how I'm built. I'll give you an example. One time my little 9-pound Chihuahua was with me and we were walking. Mind you, I'm 6 months pregnant with my daughter. We're off on a walk. And somehow this cane Corso, I don't know how
cane
to say it.
Cane Corso. Yeah, it's a big ass dog.
He's a big Mastiff dog. Got out from somebody's yard. And this dog is bolting after my dog. And I'm like, my dog's about to be a Scooby snack.
Yeah, Chihuahua versus...
Yeah, so my dog was a little bit ahead of me, and the dog was coming from the side, so my dog started to run further from me, and this dog... So I'm bolting after this dog, and he gets kind of on top of my dog, and my dog luckily scoots back really fast, so now he's underneath the belly of the dog, not quite in the mouth, and so I tackle this dog. And then I don't know what happened because it all happened fast. I pick up my dog, and then this dog's running at me, and I push kick the dog just as it's launching at me. And I went home and I'm all shook up, and luckily the dog wasn't aggressive towards people. I didn't have time to assess that.
Right.
I'm 6 months pregnant, and I'm out there wrestling this Mastiff dog that could have,
could have ripped your throat out. Yeah.
It could have seriously injured me. And I realized I felt so guilty because I knew that I had put my unborn daughter, Amaya, who
yes.
I had put her in serious danger, and I didn't have time to think about that. It's just the way that I am. Luckily, Scooter was fine, and I got away with just a really banged up knee.
Scooter owes you one, man.
Oh yeah, he owes me one. He's still kicking.
It's funny you mentioned about wrestling. I had a similar experience to you in high school wrestling, not because I was a girl, but because my dad's job transferred and I didn't go to a high school where they had wrestling until 11th grade. And so I was a brand new, didn't know anything in wrestling on a state championship level team in California, which is a really big deal. And it just so happened they had a hole at 160 pounds on the varsity team. So they're like, whatever, Scott tries hard. We have this hole to fill. And there was so many times I was going out to the mat and my coach was like, just don't get pinned.
Dude, that was it, right?
we need you to just get the team an extra point by not getting pinned. And I had so many matches where it was I was dying. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm wrestling against the guys that have been doing freestyle camp since they were 4 years old. But I'm all right, I got to just not lose. Yeah. And there's some tenacity that comes from wrestling, which I think is why something 60% of the UFC fighters that have ascended to a championship level come from wrestling. What do you think it is about high school wrestling, which is kind of an overlooked sport in America? Everybody wants to go see football or girls volleyball or something. What do you think it is about high school wrestling that creates that tenacity in boys and girls?
Well, it's one-on-one. And although the battle that people see on the outside is physical, it is so much more than that on the inside. The mental durability that you have to not give up on yourself, even when you're being squished and someone's got you almost 2 shoulders down and you can't breathe and you are fighting for everything that you have to not get pinned. People who play sports don't often have to get that deep with their self. I don't think that happens necessarily in basketball. I played volleyball too, these running, although they can be introspective, and you're talking about a combat sport where someone else is trying to force you and move you around and you're battling hand to hand. That's just one of the most raw forms of competition that there is. And I think that it forces you to spot your weaknesses and solve them, try to eliminate them if at all possible. And to your point, my senior year as well, we didn't have a 145-pound we didn't have a 152-pound wrestler. We had 2 145ers. I was one of them. I didn't know how to cut weight, by the way. I fight now at 135. So had I known a little bit, I probably could have been a little lighter, but I literally just would walk in at whatever I walked. And we had our team captain who was a 145-pounder. So we did not have anybody at 152. So what would happen is we would both go in, the team captain and I, and weigh in at 145 pounds on varsity, by the way. We had no 152-pounders, no amateur, no JV guys. And then the coaches would decide who would wrestle 152. So that meant that sometimes, and this is just my 4th year of wrestling and only in season, I'm not talking about year round. Like a lot of these guys do those camps, like you're talking about.
Yeah, Greco-Roman, freestyle, this crazy stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, they do all of it. Or they've been doing it since they're kids, or at least since middle school, I would say. Most wrestlers do not start their freshman year of high school. Most wrestlers, if they're wrestling at that point, usually have wrestled before. Okay, so now I not only have testosterone and these built guys, because I'm not tiny. You think about maybe the 103-pounders.
Right.
They can kind of get away sometimes with beating guys that haven't gone through puberty yet.
Yep.
Right? These usually 103-pounders are just a little late to the draw, and they're still tiny, or they're young. You don't see many seniors that are 103 pounds. 152 though. I mean, that's just like putting me out like a little lamb to slaughter, right?
Right.
But I'm like, okay, I got it. It's like, and it was the same thing, just don't get pinned.
Yeah. Because I'm sure you were a strong girl, but you're wrestling a man, an 18-year-old, 152-pound guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you must have been really tough.
Tough for sure, and flexible. That was the other thing. I got away with a lot of flexibility, the potentially dangerous. Thank God that's a rule. Because, it's like, oh, my shoulder's going to dislocate. Yep, can't turn me.
That's wild. So you didn't understand in high school like how to cut weight, because like you said, if you fight as a seasoned pro female who's probably got a lot more muscle mass on you now than you did in high school at 135, and you were walking around at 145, then what does your weight cut look like when you have a UFC fight? Like, where do you start? I know I'm not supposed to ask a woman her weight, but in this context, I think I can. Where do you start when you start like a training camp for a fight? And then are you 135 for like 3 seconds to weigh in, and then you're right back to 145, 150? How does that weight cut work? Because that always fascinates me.
It's more like an hour and a half to 2 hours, I would say, that we're 135. Maybe a little less. Depends on how late you show up to weigh-ins. But yeah, really like just a short period of time. And you show up, and then if you're waiting there for weigh-ins to start and the paperwork and all this stuff, then sometimes you're there for a little bit longer. But anyways, yeah, to answer your question, I usually start my training camps at about 149, 150. Okay. Maybe 152. And then I will diet down wherever I'm at in that range to 147. And I usually just sit there. And then I cut from 147 down to 136. And then I come back up.
Holy cow. So the last 11 pounds is water weight, sauna, just being miserable?
Yeah, basically. It's just once you stop eating, you lose a few pounds. Usually my water cut starts from about 143. So at the part where I actually have to work to get it off. I'll usually drop from 147 to about 143, 144 just by not continuing to drink or eat. And then I will have to work to sweat the rest off and actually start the dehydration process from about that weight down to 136.
Do you ever worry, and I'm sure guys worry about this too, but maybe it's specific to women. Do you ever worry like what that's doing to your endocrine system, or like if you're going to be, have problems as you get older? Like, is this a thought, or has the science advanced enough to where you're like, no, it's pretty safe the way that I do it?
Oh, I know I messed myself up a few times doing this incorrectly. As I mentioned, the blind leading the blind, that was one of the last parts to come around in our sport, our relatively young sport, was the science and people who actually knew how the body works, because we used to just do the dumbest things. So I have revamped and changed everything about the way that I cut weight. But I used to drink distilled water, cut all the salt out, eat like carbohydrate foods, which would hold water. I didn't know the first thing about it. And then I'd get in a bath that was as hot as I could possibly stand it, which doesn't make any sense because all you needed is hot enough to sweat. You don't want to cause, like a heat stroke basically. But it was just like, oh, the hotter the better, It's like you're burning yourself to get in, and you're sitting in there and you just feel like you're going to die because it's just, you're overheating. Your body can't sweat any faster than its max sweat rate. So it doesn't help to make things miserably hot. We didn't know that. They would like lock me in a sauna, and you're like on the ground, like breathing the little bit of air that comes out from underneath the door because you think you're going to die, and used to do it all wrong. Now it's completely different. And I would say for me to make weight from 147 is no problem at all.
What's the new science? Does it still involve the sauna and stuff, or are they regulating your salt? Because I had a drill sergeant, ironically, in the Army who was a real undersized guy. Like maybe at his heaviest, he was $135, $140. And when he went through special forces training, the final like mission is you just walk with like 100-pound pack until they tell you to stop. And it's like, it ends up being about 22 to 25 miles. But he was terrified, he overdrank and washed all the salt out of his system. Yeah. And he ended up in a coma for like a month. Like he was a Ranger. He went to Green Beret training and he washed out because he washed all the salt and the electrolytes out of his body. But is the science caught up now where they know how to keep your body safe while you're shedding the water weight?
Yes and no. I still question a lot of the science that these athletes use, and there's still misuse of salt, in my opinion, and electrolytes where there's a reduction in it. I don't believe in that. I eat a shit ton of salt. I eat a ton of salt. Whichever version you want to put out there.
Yeah, it's fine.
I eat a ton of salt, a ton of electrolytes the entire time. Even when I'm reducing my water intake and my food intake, I still make sure that I have electrolytes because, well, it turns out your body doesn't sweat well without them anyways. So once you have an imbalance and you have a minimal amount of electrolytes, your body tries to just hold on to things. It's just we're not smarter than our bodies. Our body's way smarter than us. Right. So if you give it what it needs, it will give you what you need. So I just keep, the electrolytes coming in, and I don't ever stop. As a matter of fact, they just get more concentrated because the water, becomes less, but the electrolytes are still in there and I sweat great.
Oh, that's wild. So I want to talk a little bit about like maybe that 2015 to 2020 era, which is probably when I was like at the height of my UFC fandom, which is also when you were the most prolific in the sport. And there was this weird triangle at the top of the women's division where it's like Ronda beat you, you beat Holly, Holly beat Ronda. And it was like this like, there was basically three of you. I mean, there was a lot of people in the bantamweight division, but you three were and are, in my opinion, the best at the time. Can you talk a little bit about that time, winning your championship, any fights maybe you wish you had back, not to bring up a sore spot of the losses that you've taken in your career, but I think that's part of your story, like you and Ronda's rivalry. And I know from what I've read online and from what I remember at that time, although my memory gets hazier and hazier the older I get, there was a lot of admiration, but then there was a lot of shit talking, but then there was some respect, but then you guys competed against each other on coaches and there was more shit talking, which I think you came out ahead because I think both your fighters won in that season of The Ultimate Fighter.
Yeah, Juliana Pena, she just won the belt again.
Yeah, that's awesome. Can you talk a little bit about that triangle of champions?
Yeah, so it was well, I lost Ronda and then Ronda went to fight Holly. Holly beat her with a head kick. That was the one that happened in Australia. It was like the head kick heard around the world. And then I fought Holly and I beat Holly. I choked Holly out. And that's how I became the champion. But a lot of crazy things happened up until that point. And, obviously the Ultimate Fighter against Ronda. And I think that's maybe the first time when people got to see like the other side of Ronda,
Right.
Because I think before that, she was kind of like America's sweetheart. And I think for whatever reason, well, I know the reason, but she ended up leaving that show as a heel.
She came across really just angry, and because I remember watching that whole show, I probably watched the first 20 seasons of The Ultimate Fighter. She just came across really like bitter and petty, and I think that's probably when I became a bigger fan of yours because I'm like, oh, this gal's like totally composed. She's there for her fighters. She just has a better personality, quite frankly. And Ronda just came out of that show looking horrible. Like, I don't know if she was going through a divorce during that show or I don't know what was going on, but it was very good for your PR and very bad for her PR.
I think the worst part of it is you could expect her to be, however, to me, we're rivals, we're going to fight each other. You could expect that on a reality show that she's going to be a bit pissy or a bit, rude or whatever. And I expected that and I was fine with that, to be honest. What I really hated about it was how she treated everybody else on the show, like the people who work behind the scenes. the people who were interviewing, the producers. Like, these people are so nice. Like, they're still friends of mine to this day who are literally the nicest, kindest people just trying to do a job. And she would just shit on them. Like, like so mean. And I just never understood why she thought it was okay to treat people who can't fight back like that. It's one, me, sure. Of course. Like,
you can understand trying to get into your head, trying to set up the future fight or the publicity for it. That all makes sense. But like, why shit on the camera guy? That guy's just trying to do a union job.
I didn't get it. And it was just like she was unhappy, and it seemed like she was just unhappy in some part of her life and taking it out on all the people that she knew she could get away with that, because if somebody's job came to the line, it wouldn't be hers. Like, if she had a problem with somebody, she'd just be like, Dana, get him. Like, I don't want him. You know, so they knew that they had to just play along and to just be treated like crap. And I just don't, really bothers me. So like, I was so sad when I lost the fights against Ronda. The first one I was sad too, but the second one for sure, after having done the whole show with her, because I felt like I wanted to defend those people. You know what I mean? Like, I wanted to get one over on her just because, and it just didn't work out, but it truly was such a humbling experience. And it taught me so much about character development and getting over those losses and wanting something and working so hard for it and not getting it and actually losing it in like the worst kind of way. You know what I mean?
How was that?
So, losing not only by armbar again.
Right. Which is kind of her specialty.
Right. Yeah, it was definitely her thing. She was great at it. Really ahead of her time. And it was so hard to find training partners for Ronda at that time. There wasn't really women doing judo, doing fighting. There were some men that would do it, but totally different style than Ronda. So I'd like try to figure out, get a feel for judo. But she was just she was before her time.
Yeah.
So anyways, I lost. And then, I went to shake her hand at the end of it, just to be sportsman. And she refused. She just walked away. And it was just like, I just couldn't understand why I wasn't able to win in that moment. But now looking back on it, and I say, you know what? It was exactly how it was meant to be, because I wouldn't have learned the things that I learned and be forced to grow through that tremendous adversity that was presented to me had I won. And, I don't know, I think it made me a more well-rounded person, not even just as an athlete, just as a person, to know what that feels like. And that's would be anybody, somebody who loses their job, like to just know what the ultimate loss is, like something that's really important to you, and missing the mark and losing that. It's like, I know what that feels like. It's really hard.
Well, what's crazy is that Dana White and the UFC went over a 5-7 year period because of people like you and Ronda and Holly Holmes, went from like, a woman will never fight in the UFC. It's not interesting. They're not strong enough, whatnot, to now you have multiple cards a year where women are headlining, right? And it's like, I pulled up just so that I didn't think that I remembered this wrong. I was on YouTube before our interview. I was like, did Dana actually say that? Like, women will never fight in the UFC?
Yeah.
And sure enough, he did. So
many times.
Yeah. You were at that forefront of like women being accepted into the UFC. And I don't know. I don't mean to overplay my hand, but it's like, do you feel that there's a certain legacy there that you helped build and you're still building as an active fighter on the roster? And you're a pretty humble person, so I don't know how you like to talk about yourself, but it does feel like if it wasn't for the three of you, Holly Holmes and Ronda, like there might not be women for people like my daughter to look up to, who we had a barbecue here a couple of months ago, and she walked in front of a UFC fight and she's like, Dad, are those girls fighting? And I was like, yeah. And we've talked about how much dues cost to go to jiu-jitsu. And she's like, how much do they pay to be there? I'm like, no, honey, they're getting paid to fight in there. And I could see her eyes light up where she's like, I could fight somebody and make money for it. And I was like, oh shit. I'm like,
what did I
just do?
I know. People ask me like, would you want your kids to be fighters? I'm like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But if they were, I'd try to make them the best in the world.
Right. So where do you think you fit into like that legacy building of women's fighting in combat sports?
Well, at the time I didn't realize this, but I look back on it now and I'm so grateful to have had a rival like Ronda. So, I mean, I'll be honest, give credit where credit's due. Ronda led the charge without a doubt. She beat me with an armbar in my first fight, and I refused to tap out. And it was a good fight. It was back and forth, I think. It was competitive. Yeah. She got me in that armbar, and I wouldn't tap, and she snapped it, bent it backwards, like 90 degrees backwards, and I still was just not tapping. And finally, the fight ends. I lose via the armbar, and I remember thinking prior to that fight, a long time, like years before, when Dana White was starting to be asked, when will women's MMA be part of the UFC? Because Strikeforce had started putting these women's fights on, and there was some proof in the pudding. When they put Gina and Cyborg, it was their biggest selling card ever.
You won the championship like one of the second or third times in Strikeforce when they had women's in the main event, right?
Yeah. I was in that fight. I was the co-main event. It was Marlis Kunin was my rival, and then Fedor Emelianenko was the main event, and I think Dan Henderson, was the main event on that. So it was really cool. Actually, Tim Kennedy fought on that card too.
Oh, that's awesome. You just interviewed Tim recently, right?
I did.
Yeah, I love that guy.
Yeah, he was awesome. And within that interview, I went a whole different route because he talks about politics all the time and the border and all this stuff, and I was like, so tell me about raising resilient kids. That's what I want to know about. How do you do that? And Apogee, obviously, is a co-founder of that, which is obviously something you and I are a big fan of. So where was I going with that?
Legacy.
Okay. So I remember years before that, and I fought in Strikeforce. I won the belt against Marlis Kunin, and then my next fight was Ronda. But somewhere in all of that, I remember thinking, but you haven't watched me fight yet. Because Dana was like, women will never be in the UFC. And I'm like, that's because you just don't know someone as talented with the work ethic that I have exists. You haven't seen me fight yet. I can change your mind. And that is a lesson that I learned by wrestling on the wrestling team, because they did not want me there when I first showed up.
Really?
Absolutely not. Like that. And I don't think they were bad guys. They just had this preconceived notion that women can't do that. It's too hard. It's not made for women. Women don't belong on the mat. And they tried to get me to quit without a doubt. I remember my first day, I was like, I wanted to learn a move, and they just put me in with, I later learned, like, he placed like third in state. He just smoked me. And it was just like, okay, well, and looking back again, I was like, now I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to show me, like, this is how hard it can be. I'm going to show you everything up front, and you're going to quit. And I was like, I think I took the most satisfaction in that it was like, okay, you could try to make me quit, but you can't make me.
Yeah, maybe next time quit before your arm gets extended.
Yeah, that would have probably been a good idea. But, it goes down in history as one of the craziest.
How long was the recovery for that?
Actually, it was so wild. So the injury, it wasn't very long. I'll tell you in a second. But the injury itself was I dislocated my elbow. I had grade 2 and 3 tears of the tricep and bicep. I fortunately did not disrupt the ulnar nerve, but the doctors told me that I avulged the tendon from the bone, which means that the tendons on either side of my arm had actually ripped chunks of bone off with them and were kind of floating independently, but that they had bone still attached to them. So the bone grew back into my own arm and reattached the tendons. Like, that's luck, actually. It sounds disgusting and terrible, but if I had ripped the tendon clean off the bone with no bone with it, I would have had to have surgery to reattach it, and that's one of the most difficult. I think it's a very difficult thing to have a successful surgery of reattaching tendons. So I fought 6 months later.
Like, you're smart. After that, you didn't think like, maybe I'll try something else. You were like, no, I got to get back in the ring and like prove myself again.
As fast as possible.
Really?
Yeah. So 6 months later, I had a fight, which means that it was 4 months of recovery because you need 2 months for training camp.
Oh, my goodness.
I was very close to back to 100% in 4 months. I don't know, like Wolverine speed. I mean, that does sound impossible. I think look at it now. I'm like, how did I do that? But you know what? You know what I did? I moved my arm all the time. I never stopped moving it, even if it was passively, like moving my other. I would put it in a sling only at the end of the day once I just felt like my arm was so exhausted and, was hurting it more. But otherwise, I tried to use it as much as I could. And now I know that there's a lot of science and research behind that, where you do want to try to move. That's how you teach your body to lay down scar tissue in the right direction. So a lot of times people like get injured or have a surgery and they just like get it stuck in one place, but then the scar tissue doesn't really have instructions. So it just kind of lays it down like a messy pile of hay everywhere, as opposed to like, oh, this is the lane. Oh, I see how we move. Okay, this is how I lay it down.
Interesting.
So movement's super important when you're healing. And I actually, not to keep bringing up my podcast, I know I keep bringing it up. No, we should.
It's excellent, by the way.
But episode 2 with Gary Reinl, the anti-Iceman, he debunks why icing it doesn't work. Icing locally. It's been peer reviewed 4 times. They tried to prove it eventually because icing caught on as this fad. This kid lost his arm by getting it cut off by a moving train, and they reattached it. And then they said, well, how'd you do that? Like, well, we put it on ice. So then icing, well, yeah, if the limb is not attached, of course you want to stop everything from doing anything.
Right.
But if your body's still intact, it's one of the worst things that you can do.
Ice,
because you just vasoconstrict everything, nothing happens. And if you ice for too long, it gets too cold, you can hurt it worse. So it doesn't promote healing, doesn't take away inflammation. All that's nonsense. It doesn't work. So
that's wild. I remember, now that you're mentioning it, reading something years ago when Kobe Bryant tore his Achilles, and the old science was, okay, we're going to repair your Achilles. You're going to stay off it for 8 weeks. But luckily he had a trainer who was ahead of his time. And he's like, no, like 3 days later, he was on the treadmill. Now, he was in one of those air suit treadmills that takes most of the weight.
Yeah.
But the whole point was, especially because the Achilles gets so little blood flow, you've got to get moving right away, or else, to your point, that scar tissue doesn't know how to heal, and it's a forever injury instead of something you can come back from.
Correct. Yeah. Movement is healing. I mean, and that goes for whether you have an injury or whether you're a person who's aging, which we all are.
Right.
I mean, movement is medicine. The day that you stop moving is the day that you are on a trajectory towards death. If I'm being honest, you can, and you lack a quality of life. Like when an elderly person gets bedridden, it's not long.
Yeah, it's over.
Right? It's over. So the more that we move our bodies, the more we move towards having longer longevity and better quality of life and all of those things. But it also works for injuries, so it's a pretty incredible one.
So speaking about aging, you're still under contract with the UFC, right?
Yeah.
And I know you fought a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago. Are you planning to fight again? Like, how does one stay in shape, like between fights? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I've been fighting through the UFC since 2013. I had a 4.5 year layoff where I retired and was like, I'm done with this sport. And then I had some time off, obviously, and I had my kids. And I was like, I want to fight again. I've fallen in love with the sport. So I had my successful comeback. I think that was in 2023. Yeah, that sounds about right. 2023. And
which was a win.
No, it wasn't 2023. It was earlier than that, because had to be like 2021. Excuse me. Yeah, time goes by fast, man. Whew. And then that was a win. And then I had to do so much development on my mental and emotional side, which I always thought was my strong point, my mental. But it actually got to a point where it got detrimental, because you can only burn the candle at both ends for so long before you burn out. And so I always had this mentality of, well, in spite of, the more adversity, the better, I'll overcome it, until I couldn't do that anymore, until I broke. Like, it was too much weight. And then I lost. I actually started that trajectory, I would say, before I even won the title. So I beat Holly, but it was close. Like, I was in the 5th round and it was kind of a Hail Mary. I definitely could have lost that fight. But I did get that epic finish, and it was great and everything. I was just like a shell of myself. I had already started really having not to offer what I knew I was capable of, or maybe I didn't even know it at the time, but I found out later. And then I lost my next 2 fights. I lost to Amanda. I lost to Raquel. And I retired because I just couldn't figure it out at that time. I didn't know why everything was so terrible. Like, everything was terrible. And especially after winning the title, this is something was really wild to me. It was like, it was great, and it's the pinnacle of the sport, and it's everything that you want. It was great for like a week, like 2 weeks. And then I was just sad again.
Why?
I was just consumed. Like, I was depressed. I think a huge part of it was I was in a really bad relationship, and we were about 9 years into this relationship. And I knew probably at about the 4 or 5 year mark of this, like, I had decided, like, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. But the guy that I was with would, like, he would threaten that he was going to kill himself if I left. And then, of course, you're like, well, I'll just wait till he calms down, but then they get a mental grip on you again, and you feel bad. And my great uncle Ed, he actually said one of the most profound things to me, which I think certainly started to change my trajectory of, like, I've got to get out of this relationship, is that he's like, Miesha, you are so afraid of hurting him that you will hurt yourself instead.
Yeah.
And I said, you are right. For me, it's like death by 1,000 cuts, but I'm saving him from jumping off the cliff. So I realized at some point that it was either going to be his life or mine, because I was to the point where I didn't know if I wanted to live anymore in those circumstances. And it got really dark. It got really bad. And
I mean, this is at the pinnacle of your career. You're a champion. From the outside looking in, you're doing Sports Illustrated covers,
right,
like all kinds of crazy shit. And behind the scenes, you were this emotionally distraught,
contemplating my own life. Absolutely. And that's where the sickness of this all comes in. I think this happens a lot to athletes. I don't know if you've ever watched the documentary, The Weight of Gold.
No. But
put it on your list. It's a really good documentary. And it explains a lot about what athletes go through pre and post career. And it also, I think, applies to anybody who has collected any kind of fame. I think of Twitch, who killed himself, and I think about him, and I don't know him personally, so I could never speak for him, but I feel like I have some understanding of what it feels like to, quote unquote, have everything, and feel like if that doesn't fix the way that I feel, then maybe nothing ever will. Right? It's like everything I had ever worked for, I finally accomplished it. And I still was haunted by the demons of my situation and also of my past. Any traumas that I'd had in the past, I'd made an expert of compartmentalizing these things. So it was just like, put them away, close the door, shut the box, whatever. Just don't deal with it, because it doesn't help you get what you need. And once you get there, then it'll all be good. Right? Once you reach the mountaintop, like, then you'll be happy. No, millions of dollars later, a gold belt, like everything I'd ever wanted, at least what I thought, it didn't fix anything. It fixed nothing. It was a Band-Aid that temporarily made me feel better. And then it got even worse from there.
I mean, this has got to be kind of the curse of the high performer, right? Because if you're a high level performer in sports or business or anything, you're probably world class at compress, suppress, bury this down deep inside, because I've got a training to go to. I got to do 2 trainings a day. I got to cut weight. I got to be ready for the next fight. So it's almost like being a victim of your own success, where you have this ability to suppress all of this pain training for the fight or in the ring. Like, why wouldn't you just do that with your emotions, right?
Right. Well, yeah. And in short-sighted, if you want to be short-sighted, it is the thing that you do. But if you're really trying to look at the longevity of your life and the quality of your life, it's absolutely the worst thing to do. But it's necessary if you don't have any other way of doing it, right? So I just didn't know how else to try to deal with all the crap going on in my life. I didn't know how else to do it. And so I started using disassociation, just like, I don't have a good memory from that point in my life. My memory is actually a lot better now than ever, because I'm present. So much of my life during that time, the way that I dealt with it was just to be somewhere else. It was almost like an out of body experience, I'm not literally, but, you be, doing these things and just don't, like, why don't I remember that? Like, everyone else remembers that dinner. I don't remember that. I don't remember this. Now I remember those things, but I actually feel alive now, right? Like, I've really found my purpose. I've really found the things that they mean so much more to me than just fighting. And so I think that was an incredibly long-winded way of answering the question that you started with. But, I had to really sort of reinvent the wheel, and it took a lot of years. And part of it was retiring and walking away from the sport, because all I knew myself as Miesha Tate, the fighter. So I didn't know how to associate myself with any other identity. I'd really tied my entire value into a single outcome. So if I lost, like, I was a loser, and it was awful. So I said, I have to walk away from this, because I knew that if I didn't, I felt like I may take that next step in taking my life. It's a hard thing to say looking back, and, the feeling that it brings, because it was such a dark place. But I remember feeling like the best way to describe this is like if there's just a little pinhole of light in a pitch black room. And it's like you have a choice to run towards that light or you have a choice to just be consumed in the black. And it's like this little light is getting tinier and tinier and tinier. And you know pretty soon it's going to be gone unless you start going that direction. It's like, but you're in a pitch black room. You don't know what's on that way, like what's in that journey. Like what are you going to trip on? What are you going to bash into? What are you going to run into? Like, you don't know. And I think some people let that light go away, and that's how we lose these people. And fortunately, maybe it was my relationship with God, although it wasn't nourished or strong at that time, but I would say as a Christian that I feel like if you take everything away and you ask me who I am at the end of the day, it's like, I'm a God-fearing woman. Everything else that I've ever accomplished in my life can be taken away in a moment. My family, God forbid, like hopefully never, they could be gone. I could no longer be a mother. I could no longer be a wife. I could no longer be a daughter. Like I could no longer be, but you could never take that away from me. You could never take my relationship that I have with God away from me. And I think that was my pinhole. And it led me in the right direction to getting the relationships that I'd isolated myself from, being in this relationship for so long. I didn't have a relationship with my mom. I didn't really talk to my dad. It alienated myself from my brother and my sister. I had just basically given the reins over to this other person. So it was their friends. It was their family we'd hang out with. It was all these things. But it wasn't me. Nothing was me. And I had to figure out who Miesha Tate was without fighting. It was really scary. But I knew that was the choice. It was either run towards the pinhole or stay here until there's nothing left.
So you mentioned, and we can pass over it if it's too painful to talk about, but you mentioned it got worse. Like, where did it have to get to worse before you started making the journey out? And how did that even happen? Was it a friend, a family member? Was it finding church again? Was it just retiring and having some space from that? Like, again, I don't want to talk about anything you don't want to talk about, but you mentioned it got worse, but it obviously got better. We're here, thank God.
It got better.
So
when I won the title, at least there was something that was positive. And then I was still on that same path. So it's a cumulative, right? It starts to get worse and heavier because the load becomes more unbearable. It just becomes heavier. It's like someone keeps throwing a brick every day. And it's like, you can hold a lot of bricks, but eventually one of them's going to break you. And I felt like I was breaking as I entered that fight with Holly, and I broke even worse when I fought Amanda, and I was just under a puddle of rubble when I fought Rick. It was a shadow of myself. I don't remember the fight. I don't really remember the week of the fight. I don't remember the weight cut. I don't remember any of that. And still putting on this facade to everybody else on the outside, and all my interviews, and taking pictures of yourself when you're cutting weight or whatever. It's like just to try to go through the motions because you're trying to get back something that once made you feel alive or okay. It's the only thing that you really knew to like save you in that moment, and it wasn't working anymore. So that's what I mean, that little hole just started to get smaller. That little pinhole just started to get tinier and tinier. It's like all the things that used to make me feel alive, it's not working anymore. Like I'm being crushed by the weight of all of this. So I exited the relationship after I fought Amanda, but he was still so involved in my career that he still cornered me in my last fight, and it was horrible. Like I just remember the horribleness of that experience because he didn't want to let go. So there was a battle that I was fighting with him the entire time. He promises like, oh, I'll let you, just corner, it'll be about you, it'll be about this. Like he, the night, and I haven't said this anywhere before, the night of my fight, of my retirement, he attempted to kill himself. And you never want to take suicide lightly or anything like that. But it certainly, looking back on it, felt like another form of like trying to get me to like change my stance and feel sorry for him and come back like it had always been before. It felt like a manipulation tactic just because of the way that it was set up and the way that it was done. And, like it was so much. And I don't know, like the guilt that also goes with something like that, like still walking away from someone who, you can't take it lightly. Like I said, when somebody attempts or says that they're going to take their life, I felt like I literally had to choose with being okay with him possibly taking his life. And that's just a horrible feeling for anyone. You know, I don't wish that on him. I don't wish that on anybody. I want him to be better than he was, you know, when he was with me. And I want him to, you know, prosper and be a better person. So I didn't have like ill will towards him. I was actually still very grateful for so many things in my career that he helped with, a ton of things. But in that moment, it really felt like it was going to be my life or his. And ultimately I had to realize, like, I am not in control of his life and what he does. The only thing that I can do right now is look out for me, because I'm about to go. Like, I can't do this anymore. And I'm so unhappy and I'm so broken and I don't know how to fix this, but I know that I can't carry his weight too. And it was a really tough decision to make. It was really hard to still say, you know, I'm still going to walk away from this and I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray that you find the strength to find someone else in your life and become better and stronger for this, just like I'm hoping to myself. Yeah.
That's heavy.
Yeah, it was really heavy. It was really hard. But, you know, on the light side of that, what I did is I got a couple of my best friends. We went to Niagara Falls. I mean, the power of the nature right there is restorative in itself. That's what I did right after the fight. And then, you know, my friends, both from other countries, unfortunately, some of my friends live so far away. But they had come to support me at the fight. And then I went home. I went home and I packed my
Where was
things.
home by this time? Were
Vegas
you living in
still.
Vegas? Okay.
Yeah. I went home. I packed my things quickly. Well, nobody was there. I grabbed my little Chihuahua, Scooter. He's been my ride or die for so long now. When I first started fighting, he was pretty much there at the very beginning. But anyways, and I got into my car and I just started driving. And I was like, I don't even really know where I'm going. I think I'm just going to head west. It was in Vegas. I was like, I'm going to go to California, and I think I'm going to end up in Washington. I'm going to try to reconnect with some family and stuff like that. And so I just drove through California. I drove up the coastline. I slept on the beach. I slept in my car. And I mean, I'm like former world champion, right? Like,
yeah.
Yes, I could have afforded a hotel.
Yeah.
I didn't, it wasn't the purpose. The purpose was to find where I reconnected.
This is your whole eat, pray, love moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it was whatever sign on the freeway was like, okay, I'm going to go there. I'm going to go check that out. Like there's a hike over there. I'm going to go over there. I'm going to go on the beach, whatever it was, because I was trying to find like what it was that made me and feel whole outside of fighting. Because I also felt like there wasn't a way to separate the relation. I clearly wasn't able to exit the relationship and still have him be like a coach figure without the chaos of it. So I didn't know how to separate any of those things. So I was like, I'm leaving it all, and I've got to figure out how to get out of this mess that I'm in, the emotional turmoil that I'm in. So I drove up the coastline, reconnected with friends, family. I may have not even ever really had a conversation before. Great uncles, great aunts. My grandmother, who had already passed away at that time. She's the oldest of 7 siblings. And I got to sit down with these great aunts, her sisters and her brothers, and just talk about the good old days and what it was like for them. And I see my grandmother's face in these people. It's like, it was so cool to me to be able to have that moment and reconnect with family, because I think it's so important in life, like the connection.
Right.
It's so important. And so when I started to reestablish my foundation, then I think everything started to change for me. But I still didn't know how I felt about the sport or how I would come back from the sport and back to the sport. It wasn't even a thought. And then, I met Johnny, which ironically, we trained at the same gym for years. But call me stuck up. I never even gave him like a second thought.
He's a good looking dude, man.
He's a great looking dude, but they're all great looking.
Yeah.
Honestly, walk into Extreme Couture and point one guy that's not like a handsome man. They're all great and gorgeous. So I'm like, yeah, whatever, dime a dozen.
It's very rare that I'm in a group of men where I feel like the total beta bitch in the group. And then I met your husband, and there was a bunch of other dudes there and some other UFC fighters. And I'm like, dude, I'm the one that would get beat up here if we had to like go to blows. I'm like, this is so disappointing. But he's just a great guy, super understated, great dad. How did the blessing of finding him happen?
So funny. So it was a mutual friend of mine. His name is Gustavo Lopez, who worked at Encore Beach Club, who I actually knew Gustavo from way back in the day in Washington State. So we had been friends for a while. He's also fights at my same weight class, 135. So, we had been training partners, and he was like, hey, come to Encore Beach Club. Pool season's almost over, because I'd been saying I would come, and I'm not really my scene, even at that point, not really my scene.
Yeah,
but I'm like,
we're not 22 anymore.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And I was like, all right, I'll come. So I went, and, I was newly single, and I had forbid myself from dating anybody from the gym. I was like, absolutely not, Miesha. Right. That is just like,
you're like, I want to find a nice
juju.
Overweight investment banker or something.
Right.
I'm not going back to the fight world.
Yeah, I was like, I need a less masculine man in my life, somebody that's not going to, push me around too much. But, I went there, and there was 2 other guys from our gym, and one of them happened to be Johnny. And I was like, oh, Johnny, I remember him from the gym. I was like, well, tell him to come say hi. And he came to say hi. And it was like the first time I laid eyes on him outside of the gym, and had a few words. And I was like, oh my God, what a good looking man. Yeah. He is fine. And so I invited him to come to dinner with a group of us that night. And it was Labor Day weekend, actually. So it was Monday. So he'd been on the clock for 3 days straight, and he was so exhausted. He was like, I almost didn't come to that dinner. Well, thank God he did, because it was really, I think, the birth of our relationship, where we sat, we were at Yard House, down by the link.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were there, and we just sat, we just got engulfed in conversation. And pretty soon, everyone else disappeared. We were just the only 2, we were just still talking and talking and talking. And it was like, man, this guy's really cool, And then we kind of just started to go out to lunch and dinner in secret, because I was like, hey, I don't want to, I don't know where I'm at with everything. I was like, I'm not ready to get into another relationship. I'm not looking for that right now, but let's just, take it one day at a time. Just hang out, just enjoy each other, whatever. And I had already retired too, so it's not like I was in the gym every day there training or whatever. So I didn't worry about it getting too complicated, but I remember we would always be trying to not let people see us.
Be like, you go to striking at 10, I'll go to jiu-jitsu at noon. Yeah, we cannot be seen driving it together. Yeah. Exactly. Don't walk over to me with my clothes that I left at your house last night. You can't do any of that. Yeah,
100%. So then our relationships started to develop, and I was like, for the first time in my life, it was like a man that I knew I wanted to have his kids. That's how I knew. I was like, I want to have your babies. I want to bring life into the world with you. You're just, an amazing human. And, he really saved me in so many ways, and it wasn't like I asked for that. And I don't know if he even knows that he did that, but he provided the safety that I needed, and the hands off, lack of control lets me be me. I just went in August for my birthday for a week to Switzerland. And he was home with the kids.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
He's the most chill guy, especially knowing that he's a professional fighter.
Yeah.
He's just the most calm guy. And I'm like, are you calm in a psychopath way? You're going to just rip my head off? Or are you really this calm? He's like, no, I'm really this chill, dude.
Yeah, he's just so chill. And that's, I needed that in my life, I think, to just be able to find me, continue to find myself, And I mean, I remember I got the opportunity to go to Singapore and become vice president of One Championship, which was really a curveball, because our daughter was 8 months old. And I was like, so do you want to move to Singapore with me? And he's like, well, there's more logistics. He's my logics. He's the logistics. He makes everything make sense. I'm very passion pursuit. I'm the squirrel kind of person. Oh, there's something shiny over there. I'm going to run over there and do that. And it's worked out great for me, but it works out way better with Johnny to be like, wait. Let's make sure you cross the T and dotted the I.
You're like, Miesha, you need a passport.
Yeah, exactly. Here's your passport. Here's this. Oh, why don't you make your appointment actually before you have it? Oh, yeah, good thinking, So, he's just the yin to the yang, and he balances me out in such a great way that he let me continue to find myself just by being who he is.
Yeah.
I don't think he was, doing anything that was it's just who he is. He's just a good guy.
You mentioned the euphemism, when things are tough and you're going through that darkness, it's like adding a brick all the time. Every day, carry another brick, another brick. In your experience, because I've been to some pretty dark places, Did you find that there was a moment, maybe it was with Johnny, where it's like all the bricks just dropped away? Or is it this process of unpacking one brick at a time?
Well, I certainly felt like a huge weight was lifted after I retired from that fight. And I was still really scared about what I was going to find on the other side of this because I had no idea. But it was a sign that it was the right thing to do. It was the right direction to go because I felt like I could breathe again, so to speak, but it still was carrying a lot.
Yeah.
So the rest of that was like peeling back the layers of the onion and just trying to get to, something meaningful, figure out what that was and answer a lot of questions that I was having these internal dialogues with myself and trying to figure it out. And so many things that I was wondering about myself, I just had no idea. I had no answer for. So it took time to really have a good answer for those things and to know who I am. And now today I can truly say that as a Christian and as the woman that I feel like I've grown into, I have peace. That's what it's about. None of this other stuff matters. Take my house. Take my car. I don't wear name brand shit. I don't care. Like if somebody gives it to me, sure. I'll, thank you. I'm grateful. I don't buy it. I don't care about it because that's external. I don't care about the stuff outside anymore. That's programming. That's literally what they want you to think is important because they want you to be a slave to money and they want you to buy more shit that's more expensive and wear it and think that that somehow makes you more valuable. It doesn't. It's all fake. It means nothing. Your peace is everything.
You're not trading in your Toyota for a G-Wagon or something?
Never. I had a Range Rover that Dana gave me. And I had it for a few years. Like, this is too stressful. It had like white leather seats. And I was like, I've got to get rid of this. Like, I'm not made to maintain a car like this. So, but that's just, I like simple because it's manageable and my peace, it's everything. Like, you can't steal it from me. You could try whatever. You can't steal my peace. That's just like, I won't be reactive to anything that anybody says because I'm solid with myself. Right. Man. I mean, and that's a difficult place, I think, to get to, especially.
How long did it take you to get to be able to say that out loud?
I would honestly say it was only going to be within this past 2 years.
So this has been a 7, 8 year journey to get to the point where you could say what you just said.
Yeah, because a lot of it, I didn't know what I was doing. I had no real guidance. So it was very much fall on your face and get up and try to figure it out. Now I feel like I can try to help advise people to a faster track with these things, actionable, like stop catastrophizing, quit worrying about the stuff you can't control because that will consume you and has nothing to do with right here, right now, what you can control. So that's what I focus on. There's a mental coach that works with us at the UFC Performance Institute. His name is Micah and he's worth his weight in gold. He is just phenomenal. And he has helped me so much in realizing that here and now is all that matters. Because technically, 10 seconds from now doesn't exist yet. And 10 seconds in the past doesn't exist anymore. Right? Tomorrow doesn't exist. Like we assume it's going to come. There's no guarantee. So why stress and take away from myself right now when this is the moment that I can control? And by being present in this moment and focusing on what I can control instead of spending my reserve energy or all of my energy on things I can't control, it just doesn't serve the purpose, right? Yeah. So now I really try to be present. I take mindful moments out of my day. One thing we started with was mindful showers. You get in the shower and you try to engage your senses. And start for 30 seconds. And if a thought pops in your head, you would re-engage in just trying to notice your senses, like the feeling of the water. Notice your faucets you've probably never looked at before because you're too busy thinking about all the stuff you got to do when you get out of the shower, right? 30 seconds is so powerful because it reconnects you. Yeah. People say we need to disconnect from all of this stuff. We need to disconnect from social media. We need to disconnect from the computer, and we need to disconnect. While that's true, you need to reconnect, right? Not just disconnect, because disconnect isn't solving the problem. It's only half of the equation. And I would say worth its weight, it's less than that. The reconnection is what's most important. People try to disconnect. They try to go on a vacation, right? It's like, they wonder why they come home more tired from the vacation. It's It's because they didn't know how to relax and surrender to the process and reconnect. They were trying to disconnect. It's like, you got to reconnect with the purpose though, like your peace, yourself, your beliefs, your core, like who are you at the end of the day? You take away all the titles and things and possessions. Like, who are you? You know?
Yeah. This podcast is so timely. I mentioned before we started recording, I just got back from a mastermind group that I'm part of called Front Row Dads. And Front Row Dads is like fathers who are also business owners, not business owners that are trying to make time to be a father. And, you know, a lot of that in the past, this has been around for about 7 or 8 years, has been, what's the plan for the future? What are you doing with your kids? What are you doing with your spouse? How are you building your business? How are you building your legacy? And tragically, one of our members of that group, John Rulin, rest in peace, recently passed, and I'm probably gonna cry now. He had his whole family, like whole extended family, over for a photo shoot. He's had a lot of success in business and wanted to memorialize this moment, and passed out in the shower and just dead on the spot. And the guy's gone through this amazing health transformation the last 10 years, probably the healthiest he's ever been, you know, doesn't use drugs or anything crazy like that. And just, it was his time, and dropped dead at 44 years old. And so at this mastermind, I was just at the 3 days preceding our interview. A lot of it was just about being present, and tomorrow is not promised, and anything crazy can happen at any time. So yeah, it's important to plan and set up your finances for the future and whatnot. But what is the value of just being present right now in this interview, present with our kids when they get home, and not just thinking that you have tomorrow or next week or next decade to get that quality time with our kids, because it's not promised. So thank you for bringing this into the conversation.
Yeah. And I'm so sorry about your friend. You know, it's those unfortunate moments that sometimes bring us to remember how important it is to be present. And the thing is that people say, be present, do this, do that. But the how is so important. I think people genuinely try. They don't have the tools or skills to do that. And I think that's where I want to come in and be a voice, because not only have I been through really hard moments, really dark moments, really challenging moments, really great moments, but it's a skill set. You don't just suddenly become present. Right? Like, you don't suddenly just be like, okay, I don't want to take tomorrow for granted, but okay, where's my work list again? Like, they don't know how to do it. So as a certified change psychology coach, I like behavior change. Like, what are the things that we can do, and how can we simplify it into an actionable piece that everybody can do? Can you take a 30-second mindful shower? Can your next meal be mindful? And that doesn't mean that your brain's not going to wander. Doesn't mean you're not going to be thinking about the laundry list of things but as soon as you notice that, it's like, okay, bring it back to here. What is my goal right now? It's to engage my senses. I'm going to slow down. I'm going to really try to taste my food. We eat so fast these days, right? Like, we just shovel it in because we have so much to do. Food is meant to be enjoyed, first of all. I love food. But sit down and just take 5 minutes to actually enjoy your meal and really try to pick out the tastes, the flavors. That is a mindful practice activity. We all have to eat. Just try that for a meal. Like, really try to taste every piece of your food, all the flavors. I got to a point where I don't even eat salad dressing anymore, because I'm like, this salad is so flavorful. Like, this is wild. I just never realized it because I was so busy dousing it with something. Anyways, you know, I just say these are actionable things that you can do, and it takes practice to become mindful and to not take today for granted and not take tomorrow for granted and all of these things. But that's part of what I'm trying to do with my platform is, you know, have good conversations with genuine people, learn stuff. And I write a newsletter too every 2 weeks. I know we talked about this before. If you go to mieshatate.com, it's really easy. Subscribe. And if you hate it, just unsubscribe. It's not going to hurt my feelings. But if you want, give it a try. I won't bombard you. It's every 2 weeks. And in there, I try to provide some of my best information, these things that I've overcome myself. I don't use AI.
You don't have a ghostwriter?
I don't have a ghostwriter. I write these things myself, and it's a lot of thought and work that goes into this, because I pour my heart and soul into it, because I want it to mean something. There's a lot of stuff out there, and I'm not putting anybody down who's got 1,000,001 things going on and needs somebody to kind of write a shell for them. And, you know, I get it. I'm just saying I'm doing it different. That's all.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to give these actionable pieces to people in that newsletter, on top of just fun things like recipes that I make and discounts and giveaways. And, like, you know, I try to make it fun and interactive as well. But the piece that I think is the most valuable is those mindset pieces that I'm trying to put into this newsletter for people so that they can really take these things and say, you know what, I hear you and I want to be more like that. How?
Right.
How do
I mean,
we
that's
do
the
that?
that's the whole purpose of your Built for Growth podcast, right? Is
Right.
like you want to bring these things to an audience of people that maybe want to accomplish the goal but don't have the tools.
Correct. Yeah.
I love that. You know, it's funny. For the last month, our coaching program, I coach loan officers and real estate agents in addition to doing loans. And I heard a tool like this, like you were mentioning, and I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try to ride in silence. So if I'm driving by myself, it has been decades since I have not. Okay, well, if I'm driving somewhere, I should also be consuming a podcast.
Yep.
And at this point, the cars drive themselves. Our Tesla literally drives itself. My truck has like adaptive cruise control. So I can be listening to a podcast while texting and driving, while going to jiu-jitsu. And the first time I did it, it's 9 minutes from here to 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu. I was so uncomfortable being alone with my thoughts for 9 minutes. I'm like, I am a shit show. Like my brain is, I can't even be alone with my own thoughts for 9 minutes. And so now it's been like a challenge. And if I'm being honest, I'm driving to Texas next month to host one of our annual events. And I'm like, Chris, you got to come with me because I have to have somebody to talk to. I got to have an excuse to listen to a podcast. I cannot be alone with my thoughts for 22 hours on the drive to Texas. But it's crazy how we're so inundated with external inputs that it's hard to just be alone with yourself for 9 minutes.
It is. And you know what happens a lot of times when you're alone with yourself? All the little things that you've compartmentalized and put away and haven't wanted to deal with because you just stay so busy that they don't have time to be present will start to come forward. And it's a really necessary thing. I don't want to scare people away from that, but do it in bite-sized pieces. I would say your present
9 minute drive.
9 minute drive, right? You tested it out and it was like, whoa. But people who oftentimes constantly have to have music on in the background or a podcast, or it's like, it's never a quiet moment. They're never just alone with their thoughts. They don't take the time to process that stuff. And I know, because I speak from experience, I was definitely one of those people. I never wanted to be alone with myself because I didn't know how to confront the things that would come at me when I was alone with myself. But now that I've gotten more comfortable with that, so has my peace come, right? Because I've dealt with those things and I've been forgiving of myself. I've been tolerant of, the imperfections and just, it's okay. Like you can move through this. You can get through it. You can work through this, but you've got to address it. Otherwise nothing changes.
Yeah.
Right. So there's moments when you can be alone with yourself and just with your thoughts, like, do it small first, but try to get in touch with yourself. Try to ask yourself the dark questions or the hard things or move through your trauma so that it doesn't become a weight that you carry anymore. It can actually move through you instead of just staying on your back.
Yeah. I love that. I want to give the fight fans one more chunk of something to listen to who showed up to hear about your fight stuff. You mentioned preparation process. My friend Hal Elrod, who wrote the book, The Miracle Morning, if he's out here again, we should have him on your podcast. He has this quote where he says, every success you've ever had in your life was preceded by a process. Whether that's having a good relationship or mentoring your kids or fighting or whatnot. So I want to ask, as you're still under contract and we can't talk about it because of disclosure reasons and whatnot, but you have another fight you're trying to make early next year. What is the process when Miesha gets the call from Dana or his team and like, okay, you're going to fight on March 32nd. Jesus, I'm dumb. March 13th. What is the process for Miesha to get back into like fight mindset? And now that you're at peace with yourself, how do you turn on that switch of like, oh, now I'm going into the ring with somebody who's going to try to kill me and I need to try to kill them? Like, what does your process look like when you get the call that there's another fight coming up?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's a little bit of a loaded one. So hang on here with me for a second. But I will tell you that my entire career, I was always outcome based. I had to be a winner. So I was a winner. Because if I lost, I was a loser. And what I realized is that I had to get comfortable with the concept of being effort-based and no longer outcome-based. Because what I realize is a lot of times the goals that we set for ourselves are limiting. We are capable and will likely receive so much more than that if we focus on the process to get there. Just what he said in that quote. Right? So now I think about, I'll use my last fight, for example, and my career prior to this last fight. So leading up to my most recent fight, I had always thought winning was the most important thing. So at all costs, winning was the focus. That was the goal, right? But a lot of times I would win fights and I knew I had so much more to give, but I was playing it safe. I wasn't taking risks to be my best or discover what I'm even really made of. I was just focused on winning. And if it was enough to win, then I was good in my books. I'm not satisfied with that anymore. And that means I had to come to terms with that might mean in lieu of becoming your best and really finding what you're made of, you may lose, right? Because anytime you take risks, the more risk you take, the more potential there is for it to get a little squirrely.
Right.
You don't really know whether it's going up or down, you know? And I had to be okay with that. But I also thought, well, if I really focus on my effort instead of the outcome, I'm also more likely to get the outcome that I want.
Right.
Right? Like the odds are like I'm more likely to go for that because I know that I'm good at what I do because I work hard for it and I've done it for a really long time. So there's no reason to not believe in myself. And even if you're starting your career and you haven't proven that to yourself, like just the fact if you can switch your mindset like this, that's a reason to believe in yourself.
Yeah.
Like you're cut of a different cloth. If you can start to internalize this and really wrap your head around how much you put into something versus what you get out of it. That's what really matters. And my last fight, I don't want to say last like I'm retired, my most recent fight, because everybody's like, when are you retiring? Not yet. I went into that fight as a betting underdog, and I had lost my 2 fights before that. So my 2 fights before that were close decisions. I lost. I didn't wrestle at all. That's what got me to the dance. So for me, getting back to my wrestling fundamentals changed everything. And I went into this fight with the goal of I will take her down no matter what. I may lose this fight. I'm okay with that. But I'm giving everything that I have to get this girl on the ground and work her because I know that if I do that, I can. And I had a 10-8 round 1, complete domination. I think I got her down in like 13 seconds. Round 2, same thing. Got her down. She stood up one time against the fence. And instead of the old Miesha, what the old Miesha would have done is fight so hard to keep her down that I would have lost position. And I said, you know what? She's going to stand up. She's already on her way up. Let's go with the pressure. Let's lift her as she stands, take her right back down. Instead of being like, no, I can't let you do that. I can't let you get up. You know, that's what I used to do. Like, I've got to hold on to like for dear life. And then pretty soon you're in a bad position. Right? So 10-8 round, second round, third round, same thing. On my way to a 10-8 round and I choked her out. And that was a fight that, you know, by most people looking in thought that I was going to lose that fight. Well, I could see why, because based on the 2 fights before that, I wasn't wrestling at all. I was just striking, and this girl was more of a striker, you know, than I am. And no, but she was also a black belt on the ground. And I just absolutely, that fly just loves you, doesn't it?
Yeah, the fly's getting really annoying. More proof that we film in my garage, right?
Yeah, I love it.
Oh, man.
At least it's not bothering me while I'm talking. So
yeah.
Anyways, you know, that's what I did is I moved my whole focus from the outcome based. And it blew my mind because I not only got the outcome that I wanted, but it was far better than I ever could have imagined. I didn't just win. I dominated in a fight that I was supposed to lose. And all I did was change my mind. My body was like the same preparation. I always prepare hard. I'm always in great shape. I always, you know, have good weight cuts now. Like, yeah, if anything, I might say that I probably wasn't in quite as pinpoint shape as I had been in my 2 prior fights because I had focused so much. I was working with Coach Cal, who's just a mastermind when it comes to fitness and whatnot. He worked with TJ Dillashaw, Olympic wrestlers like Helen Derulis, and there's a few more. It's too much to list. But anyways, he turned your body into a math equation. So he's a math professor as well, and he's so smart. He can write like the algorithms for like the Whoop watch, and you know what I mean, that kind of smart, like real smart,
real smart, right?
And he had me in top 1% shape for those fights, and I lost. And it had nothing to do with my conditioning. I was I could have done anything. I could have run a marathon. I could have literally anything. I was in such good shape. And then my last fight, I said, my most recent fight.
See,
you do that.
Talk to you soon.
Yeah, I know the fly's like buzzing around me now. Where'd he come from? Because he wasn't
I don't
here
know,
a little
wasn't
while ago.
here.
He just started
Go bug Chris.
visiting us. Yeah. So anyways, I started, what was I saying? Now I lost my train of thought.
Top physical shape.
Yeah, I was in the best physical shape. And then my most recent fight, I didn't work with Coach Cal because I realized I had to do more work on my mental and emotional. So I focused on that as opposed to like the insane workouts. And I was still in good shape, great shape.
Right.
But I fixed everything in my mind and my heart, my soul, like all of that was working synergistically. And I was like, that's what you're capable of, Miesha.
Because everybody in the UFC is some type of top 0.10010000001% of physicality. So, I mean, in rare form, does somebody or in rare circumstances does somebody dominate somebody else in the UFC physically? I have to imagine at that level, you know, like Michael Jordan has talked about, it's much more of a mental game, right? Like everybody in the NBA made it into the NBA, but the true superstars, it probably came because of their mental toughness.
Yeah, believing in themselves. Absolutely. It was all mental for me because I know I was capable of that much sooner in my career. I just lacked the concept.
Yeah.
I just held myself back by my own goals. Oh, just win. That's so simple and short-sighted. No, be your best. Because even if you lose, I feel like even if I lost, I would sleep so much better knowing that I'm really finding out what I'm made of.
Yeah.
Than like having this shallow, short-sighted goal that doesn't really show anything that I'm capable of.
Right.
Right? That's how it felt anyways. And so that was, to me, the most liberating fight of my career. And it wasn't that important to anybody else. You know, I was on a fight night card. It's not for a world title. It's not any of that stuff. But I know what happened and the transformation that happened inside myself that brought me to be that dominant. And also got to give a huge shout out to my coach, Kirk White, who just made my wrestling game savage again. Got me in touch with my roots, taught me things that I didn't know before that really made everything that I do a lot more simple. And he's a great mindset coach too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So how often do you have to work out? Like, because you could get the call at any time, right? And I know there's like an 8-week intensive fight camp, but like how often do you work out now just in your normal course of life to stay like UFC fit?
Well, I don't think that I'm, fight ready conditioned all the time. And I also kind of think that it's a little bit important that women have a little more ebb and flow in this just because hormonally it doesn't quite support us. And I won't get off on too much of a tangent like that. But you guys have testosterone every 15 minutes. You get testosterone. Right. We get that like once a month.
Right.
Like the rest of our hormones, I hate to say it, ladies. I'm not saying you can't do anything, but we were basically designed to carry life. Right. To procreate. And
kind of important.
Kind of important to the future of humanity. Yeah. Pretty big responsibility. So I think for us, like sometimes it's good for us to not be so low in body fat, to, kind of just like, dial back, chill, have some easier practices. I would say when I'm off camp, it's like 3 or 4 times a week, that I'm in there. And that depends on injuries too. I've been battling some injuries this past year and it sucks.
Yeah.
So a lot of on the technical side of training, I haven't been able to be in there. I would say when I'm completely healthy, it's usually 3 times of strength and conditioning and another 3 times of just like doing a grappling or event or something like that. Just easy, like it's nothing too crazy or hard.
Just easy trying to choke people out for a living.
Yeah. It's fine.
So
once
when
a
you
day,
get
6 days a week kind of thing.
When you get the call, what will that 8-week fight camp look like?
It'll be 2 practices a day for 5 days of the week and usually 1 practice on Saturday and then Sunday off. Sometimes I mix that up a little bit. Sometimes I'll do a half day on like a Wednesday and then I'll do 2 practices on Saturday. Or sometimes I'll just, mix in like another half day in there and just be like, guys, I'm just really worn out. I need another half day. And that's what's cool. People don't realize this as athletes. Like we're the CEO of our own life. For the longest time, it was like, coach, tell me what to do. Now I'm like, nope. Like I make all the decisions and I don't have no pride or I don't have any qualm with that. Some athletes be like, oh, they're going to think I don't work hard. This sounds like,
your body better than anybody.
If you don't think I want to work hard, I don't know what to say. I don't know. I don't have anything to say to you. Like I worked so hard, but I know when my body needs the rest and I'm just going to be true to myself. I'm not going to answer to anybody anymore. So, I'll just be like, yeah, nope, I'm not doing that, or no, guys, I know we were gonna spar tomorrow, or we were gonna spar today, hard spar. I need it to be a technical sparring session now because I'm just not feeling totally up to it. And we move the hard sparring to Saturday, or we'll do this, or we'll. And they're actually really cool about it, but I just don't see enough athletes doing that. And I think they lack the confidence to be able to tell their coaches. They're too, again, worried about the external. If you have honest accountability, you have nothing to worry about.
Right.
I know at the end of the day that if I didn't do what I needed to do to prepare for a fight, it's only my ass on the line.
Right.
No one else is getting their ass kicked.
Right.
Where is my motivation to cut corners? It doesn't exist. I have children to come home to healthy.
Yeah.
So that my motivation is actually to listen to myself and no one else. You know, when my body's telling me what I need, and do that.
Have your kids been to one of your fights?
Yeah, they've been to a couple of fights.
What's that like?
Oh, it's different. I mean, my kids have developed so much along the way. So it started, I mean, I was actually still nursing when I came back from my first fight in the UFC.
Holy shit.
Yeah, my son, Daxton, he was still nursing at that time. I nursed him for about 1.5 years, and I think I came back when he was a little over 1 year old.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it was just, trying to do it all. But no, he was too little to know at that point. My first fight, I came out relatively unscathed. And then my second fight, I got a laceration, second fight back under my eye. And I came home and I was pretty swollen and pretty, got stitches in my face. And Dax was still little. He was probably 1.5 years, not quite 2 yet, 1.5 years. Didn't really seem to care. And my daughter was very inquisitive. She's so inquisitive, very inquisitive little girl. And so she would ask me things like, Mommy, does it hurt? She's just 3-ish, 3.5. I said, no, honey, it doesn't really hurt. And I said, do you want to help me clean it? You want to help me change the bandages? So we kind of played like a little game of like Dr. Maya. And I tried to get her involved in that process because I didn't want it to be a scary thing for my kids. I'd already really thought about how can I, what if I do come home really banged up? How to explain this to my kids? So I just try to be as transparent as possible. And then my daughter's like, Mommy, why do you fight? And I'm like, well, I mean, you like playing, right? It's kind of like a play date.
Right. Totally different. I've never come home from a play date with the kids with stitches. So,
right. Yeah.
That's
it's
wild.
A little different, but I was like, but kind of the same. Like it's something we like to do.
There's a gal, Val, who works at our gym. She's a black belt. I think she's still an amateur fighter. She cannot get a fight to save her life because everybody's scared of her. And she came and talked to the gals at Apogee, and we really wanted to hire her as a guide, but she's just on a different path right now to try to fight. And when she was there, your daughter was like, "Yeah, my mommy fights," and she's like, "Yeah, sure, kid, whatever. I'm sure your daughter fights." And it wasn't until she got in the car, she's like, "I think that was Miesha's daughter. I feel like an asshole. Of course her mom fights." So she called me the next day. She's like, "Hey, just in case you hear from one of the parents." I'm like, "Oh, what happened?" And she's like, "I was kind of dismissive of this one girl that was saying like her mom fights. And I just assumed she's like, a housewife that takes cardio kickboxing classes. And then I realized it was world champion Miesha Tate. I felt so dumb." And I'm like, I know Miesha, I don't think she's going to take it personally.
Not at all.
Yeah, I always like to end these podcasts with a couple of questions. We're filming this towards the end of 2024, obviously coming into 2025 when you're going to likely fight again. What are you most looking forward to in life of Miesha, whether it's fighting or kids or date night or whatever it is? What are you most looking forward to? And then I always like to ask, because I'm a movie junkie, what's your favorite movie and why?
Okay, good questions. So I'm most looking forward to when we move to Boise and I can homestead. Oh, I'm so excited. So I have chickens. I don't know if you know that. Like
Yes.
I have chickens. Yes, this is a gateway drug. So now I want goats and pigs and, but I want to grow my own food. That's a big goal of mine. I just want to be more self-sustaining and be able to provide for my family in those ways, because I just don't think that a lot of the bodies that are in charge of making sure our food is healthy and safe and not sprayed with glyphosates and atrazines and all the other nonsense that's not good for us to have. We wonder why we have fertility issues and all cancer. I was like, well, I'm sure part of it might have to do with the pesticides that are designed to destroy insects on a cellular level that we're eating every single day.
Yeah,
I mean,
might not be good for us.
Maybe not, So I want to have my own little homestead, and I'm so excited for that.
And is that coming sooner, or is that going to be post-fight career after you're out of Vegas?
I mean, I told Johnny, I was like, I'm ready to go now, because Kirk, my coach I mentioned, he lives in Boise.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that's all I really need. Like, Kirk is awesome. I'm not fighting for that much longer. Maybe if I was in my 20s or something like that and I was looking to reinvent the wheel, then maybe I would need something different. But Kirk is honing me in like the perfect way.
Nice.
I don't think I needed like anybody else. Like obviously I need Johnny's support.
Right.
And Johnny's a great wrestler in his own right. He wrestled at Boise State. So Kirk was one of his coaches as he was wrestling there. So Johnny's the one that introduced us. And when it comes to wrestling fundamentals, I don't know if you've ever wrestled with Johnny yet, but like you cannot stay on his back.
No.
He's a hand fighting, leg fighting machine. And he's so good at these wrestling fundamentals, hip heists and switches. So he's very valuable in that way. But you know how relationships and like training and stuff like that, like it's fine. We actually work together really well, but I never want to get like it was, I don't know, maybe it's my past. I'm catastrophizing a little bit. I don't want it to be like it was.
Right. Okay. So Boise, Homestead, we will be sorry to lose you whenever that happens. Do you have the property picked out already, or is this just
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay.
Not yet. No. So we're looking though, and we're actively like viewing properties and things like that. So I'm really excited for that. And then my favorite movie. Yeah,
favorite movie and why?
You know, my favorite movie still has to be Braveheart.
Oh, the best.
Right? Just a
freedom.
Freedom. Right? And that's brings me back, you know, one last pitch on the podcast. I'm truth seeking in that podcast. I want to know the truth. I don't want to be lied to anymore. There's a lot of things I feel like we can't trust, a lot of information. And I always encourage people, please, even if you're listening to my podcast, or you listen to Joe's podcast, you listen to your podcast, whatever, think for yourself. Yeah. I am not a perfect person. I'm not a doctor. Right. I cannot tell you everything that I do is going to work for you, but I can tell you my intentions are good, and I'm going to always try to deliver the truth because that's my credibility. That's me first and foremost. And yeah, do I get sponsors and things to try to make the podcast where it's not costing me money to do it?
Right.
Of course. But I will not have a sponsor ever. Like you cannot buy me out. I will never have a sponsor that I don't believe in.
Yeah.
Like I've already had that, like, you know,
had that offer.
It's not the point.
Right.
If I don't think it's a good product, I'm not going to bring it to people and lie to them because it defeats the whole purpose.
I'm sure there's a lot of weed stores in Vegas that want to sponsor you, and that's just not really on brand with what you're trying to do.
And I, nothing against people who smoke weed. I know plenty of people do. It's not my thing. It's not my drug of choice. I'm more of a kava and or microdose kind of person. Yeah. I like to microdose mushrooms every once in a while.
I'm more of a nicotine and caffeine, serious addiction.
I love nicotine.
I know, it's the worst.
But it's so good.
I know.
How do you consume? That's the thing though.
Well, if it wasn't for I had a lady sitting here, I'd be smoking a big giant cigar. But when I don't, I'm now addicted to these stupid Zyn nicotine pouches.
I know what you're talking about.
God, it's so bad.
Every once in a while, I'll grab one of those from Johnny too, because he uses those all the time, and like every once in a while, I love the buzz from nicotine, man. Yeah. But I don't think nicotine by itself is that bad. It's all
the stuff from smoking cigarettes that gives you the carcinogens. At least that's a story I tell myself.
Yeah,
I need to have an expert on.
Yeah, there we go. We're on the same page. I'm like, I think the little Zyn packs. There's probably some things that aren't great, but I love that buzz. Yeah, I do. I'm with you.
You heard it here first.
Yeah,
Miesha also addicted to nicotine like the rest of us guys.
No, I'm not addicted. We're gonna clarify that.
Okay, you enjoy it.
I enjoy it, but it's so rare that I do it because I like it so much. I'm like an anti-vice person. I will have no vices in my life, so I don't drink coffee. I don't like even like probably sugar. Nicotine could certainly be a vice because I love it so much. I'm so careful not to ever do it to a point where it's like I'm relying on it or need it. So it's like a real treat for me.
Well, I got to say, thank you for being on. Thank you for being like so authentic. A lot of times I can tell when I'm interviewing people, they don't want to go to any of those places that they don't want to talk about. So I just appreciate you being authentically you and honest. And I hope we have you on again.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're both local. So plus there's a great restaurant in Boulder. What is it? It's like have you ever been there? Oh, come on, Miesha. What's the name of it? Pasty?
Yes. Patsy's? Pasties? Not pasties.
Maybe
it is pasties.
See, I can never remember how to pronounce it. I go there and they tell me every time and it's still in my brain wrong. So I'm not sure if it's pasty or pasty, but it's like these little English, I think it's like English food. And did you read the history on it? Like they started it in the miners, so they make these like, they're kind of like lack of a better term, like
a pot pie?
Yeah. Kind of. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. But they're handheld.
Yeah, it's very good though.
Oh, so good. And the bread there.
We'll get the families together and we'll go there soon.
I might head there real quick after this since we're over that way.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks again for being on, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.